Okay, welcome to Unreal 3. What I've done is just simply loaded up the editor. This is for Unreal Tournament 3, not Gears of War, just in case you start to wonder. Generally speaking, this is how the editor loads up. It could also look something like that, for instance. Now, what I'm going to try to do is just to talk over the sections on skeletal mesh. Chris has covered some areas, so I'm going to try not to retread some of those particular steps. So, first things first, we're going to get our data into the engine. So, I'm opening up the generic browser, going to my import option, and finding my skeletal mesh, and hit open. Now, this is a different step to actually working with ASC files, because it will actually import the bones this time. What I'm going to do is create a package called ed209, put this in a group called meshes, and I'm going to keep it as ed209. Now, a word of caution for Unreal meshes. I advise you guys, if you're going to work with actually creating vehicles, characters and other bits and pieces, to look at other tutorials to find out coordinate systems. Max will sometimes have some issues with exporting to Unreal 3, and you will need to make sure that you rotate your model in the correct direction. I'll show you how to fix some of these things when we come to actually importing this mesh into the level. One thing you'll notice is that when you press the magic import button and OK, as I've got on my screen, Unreal 3 will chug, and it is cup of tea time. One thing I'd say is when you come to import the textures in a minute, import all three at the same time and hit OK to all. I'll show you why in a second. First I'm going to hunt down my package. So scroll down here, making sure that all my resources are available, and I've found ed. What I'm then going to do is save the package, and I always do that just because anything that involves a lot of memory is liable to crash. Unreal 2 editor was really quite poor and crashed a lot, so be warned that this editor can go crash. Just double clicked on my skeletal mesh and you'll see this is probably a new editor for the most of you. It controls pretty much like the other viewports. Our left mouse button will rotate around, right one will zoom in, and a middle mouse will pan or go up and down. So left mouse button orbit, right mouse button zoom, and then our middle mouse button up and down. Okay. So what have we got in front of us? We've got a myriad of buttons really to do different things. We've got buttons to set up our animations, we've got properties for the mesh itself. So if I go there first, and the first thing we find is materials. Yeah, we've got nothing in here, so we'll set up those shortly. Some of these properties, I'm not going to go through all of them because there are hundreds, but I'll go through some of the most important ones. Origin and rotate origin. These are some of the most important pieces. You can see with my file that I've used at the moment, it's pretty bang on the 0, but it's still not quite there. So if you want to be perfect and get your model to line up, you'll have to adjust the origin on the X and Y. Obviously the Z is going to knock ed up and down. The rotate origin is to get ed actually pointing in the correct axis, or this can be one issue with Max, and you will need to find out how your coordinates are set up. At the moment for Ed, he's fine, but when you do characters, vehicles and guns, then you need to be really careful with this, so make sure that you do read about exporting in the correct origin and things like that. Okay, we haven't made any collision for Ed at the moment. It's not too important at the moment, but we can actually go in later and generate a physics asset and those sort of things. Okay, animation set. If you remember back in the last video, I was talking about moving chunks and getting them to stay in the right in the right sort of axis and things like that. If you are working with transformers or part mechanical objects that you are moving, you will need to have a look at this tab here, because sometimes you can get bits that just float off all over the place. That's what that button is really. The rest of these properties we shall leave for now. Okay, so if we look through these bits above it, we can add additional meshes to head. This is our controller of animations. None of these are appropriate to Ed at the moment. We're going to have to make our own. And this is for morph targets. And predominantly in Unreal, morph targets are mainly used for damage. So we can have vehicles blowing up, and you can set up different parts of, or different sort of static meshes to make the vehicle look like it's blowing up in real time. So that's something else you could do with Ed. If you set up some Kismet or AI, you can get him to blow up, which is quite cool. So that's something you could have a look at in your own time. Across the top we can show our skeleton. So this is our linking. So we can see all of our toes being linked, and we can see the pink line going down to the ground plane. Turn that on and off. We can actually look at the bone names. We can look at Ed in wireframe. And we can go through all of these different bits and pieces. We can set up sockets. Sockets, incidentally, for those you don't know, essentially what we can do is we can tell Unreal 3 use the bone in the hand to place a gun on. So essentially we just make a new socket, choose the bones, and then say what it's for. So very useful, good for sticking things together essentially. It's kind of like Unreal 3's super glue. We can look at cloth, we can look at LODs, but obviously we've not got those at the moment. Across the top is more in-depth things for us to look at, so we can do different bits and pieces, we can create LODs for it and all the rest of it. To start with, what I'm going to do is I'm going to import my animation. So first off, I need an animation set or an anim set. So I click New. I set up my main package for this. I then set up a group, so I'm going to call this animations, and then I'm going to select Ed Anim Set and hit OK. So with the animation set up, we can see here it is, but there's nothing actually imported into it at the moment. We have to find it first in our anim window, select it, and then hit File, Import PSA. And the PSA file is what we got from Max, so find it wherever you exported it to, and double click. And this has now imported our animation. And to check this animation is fine, we'll just hit play on this little arrow down here, and we can now see that the animation works like so. Yeah. And you can change it to a loop and all the rest of it, but we can now see the actual animation play. This is quite a useful thing because we can actually switch on the bones and you can see which sections are moving, so it's quite useful for just debugging your animation sometimes in case you've got like a rogue bone which isn't working how it's supposed to. Okay, so that's our animation actually dealt with. So I'll hit close, I'm going to right click and hit save. That's now saved our animation and our character. Now when we actually come to handling animations, if you want to do more complicated things, then you need to look at something called animation trees. Let me see if I can fully load one of these mail packages. Excuse me. I'm going to have a hunt for one of them. I'm just going to knock off these bits and pieces and find an anim tree somewhere. Okay, let's load up the human. And all I'm doing here is just to demonstrate this anim tree here is a control file that shows how all of the animations in Unreal plug into each other, starting from all of the bones straight through to different bits and pieces, and these are all like wired parameters in some way in Max, and we can adjust how some of these work just by moving sliders, so it's really quite cool. We can do different things with it, but something we won't be working on with this particular example, but it's something that you should all have a quick look at if you want to do custom rigs. Okay, so I'm going to go back to showing all of my packages and go back to Ed. Now, what do I need to do? In Unreal, we need to work with materials to actually render our character, but materials require textures. In this particular engine, you have to use textures in materials. You can't just overlay a texture onto a mesh. So that's the main difference between this version of the editor and the previous. So what we need to do is import our textures. So diffuse, normal and spec. If you've got alphas and emissive, import them at this stage also. So we go to our folder and click open. Now, because they're 2048 textures, this can take a very long time. My machine isn't the quickest in the world. It's a dual core with 4 GB of RAM, and it can still take up to 10 minutes easy to import this. So what I'm going to do is, once I've showed you these settings, I'm going to pause the video and then we'll rejoin it after the import has taken place. Just to go through some of these particular settings, a lot of it's to do with compression, memory. Now, because we're not setting up a character, we're not going to do anything too advanced, but I'm going to show you them anyway. Main thing is these texture groups, and if you can see here, we've got texture group world, texture group character, weapon, vehicle, so forth. It's important that if you do plan to make a character, that you make sure you set the LOD group to the correct setting. And this is just purely to get the best from the texture and the best performance from the game. Same, you can change the lighting model, which is more to do with the material side of things. We can play with the alpha setting, the blendings and so forth. So if you wish to achieve any special effects and really gain control knowledge of how all this works, have a look through some of these bits and pieces. Now I'm going to make another folder called textures. I'm going to hit OK to all, which means that all 3 textures will be imported on this setting. If you wish to do it correctly, import one at a time and change the LOD group to either normal map or specular. And that's about it. So I'm going to hit OK to all now and pause, just so that you don't have to see a loading screen for 10 minutes.